Hello, my name is Sarah Herzog, and this is the fifth in a 5-part tutorial showing how to create a simple health system. So for this video, we're going to be covering how to make your health display as a bar, as a health bar. If you prefer to use icons, like heart icons to show your health, please go look at part 4. If you prefer text, look at part 3. For all of these last parts, you will need to have completed parts 1 and 2, which will be how you set up the actual underlying data for your health. Okay, so for this part, you will be displaying the health values that you set up in part 2 using a slider component in Unity, and this will be used to make a health bar. As usual, we will be using a condition action pair for kind of planning how our code will work. And in this case, we're going to be doing something every frame. So the condition is very simple, every frame, and the action will be update a slider's value. And what that value will be updated to is simply your current health divided by your total health, because it will be a percentage. Okay, so how do we do that? First of all, we need our slider. And to get a slider in Unity, that will be on your UI, on your user interface. So if you don't already have a user interface canvas for your game, I already have one because my game happens to be a mobile style game where we use on-screen controls. But if you don't already have one, it'll automatically be added to your scene when you add a component that would be for a canvas. So if you go into Unity and you go up to Game Object, we're going to add a slider component. So go to UI and choose Slider, okay? And if you don't already have a canvas, it will now add one. Now we're going to need to significantly modify this slider because our health bar will not be a slider that you can change. It will be a slider in only the most vague sense. We're basically just using this component from Unity to make our game a bit simply. We won't be using a lot of the functionality for a slider, so we need to turn some things off. Okay, so pay close attention. We have a few steps here. First of all, we're going to click on your new slider and we're going to remove the interactability on that slider. So to remove the interactability, we go to the slider component and we choose interactable and we turn it off. Okay, that's step 1. Then what we don't want, you may see here in Unity that there are some weird lines going between these. That's a navigation line and it will allow the player to select different things using a controller. But even if we were to make this game for a controller, we would not want them to have to go through the slider as part of their controller navigation. So we need to remove the navigation here. And we do that in the slider component, you'll see a section that says navigation. It says automatic. We're going to change that to none. And that will remove the lines that were connecting our slider there. All right, next we need to delete some sections on this slider because you may see there's a little handle here where the player can drag our slider to make it larger or smaller. We're going to remove that. So if you go into your slider, if you expand your slider, there'll be some sub-objects. We're going to remove handle slide area, just delete it. So select it and use the delete keys to delete it, or you can right click to delete it. Okay, so now we should have a slider with a background and a fill area only. Okay, we're getting much closer. Now we need to update our fill area because by default, the fill doesn't actually go all the way to the end, and we want it to. So if you click on your fill area and you go to its, if you go into the fill inside it, so you need to expand your fill area, go to the fill object inside it, okay, and change the width to 0. So that means that whenever the player actually has 0 health, it won't show a little bit of health there. It will show none, which is what we want. So change the fill area to be, the fill width to be 0, then click on fill area, and we're going to change the right and left anchors to be 0 as well. We do not want there to be them to only go partially to the edge. We want that fill to go all the way to the edge. Okay, that's all the required changes. Now what you want to do now is make this slider look like a health bar because right now it looks like a terrible UI element. So first of all, click back up on the slider and reposition it where you would like it to be. I'm going to put mine in the top left corner of the screen. And I'm going to make mine a bit fatter because I think it's a bit too skinny right now. Okay, and I'm going to make it maybe a little bit longer. And I think that is looking more like an actual health bar. Okay, but of course the colors are wrong. So what I would like you to do before we start messing with the colors is to change the fill. So if you click on your slider and you go to the bottom of the component for the slider, you'll see a value variable, and you can slide that to change how filled up your slider is. So put it somewhere in the middle, because we need to be able to see the background and the foreground in order to see what color it is. Okay, so now click on the background object and you can change that to be whatever color you want. I'm going to make my background red, so it's really obvious when the player gets hurt. And then for the fill, if you click on the fill object, you can change again the color. So I'm going to make that bright green, because the player's health just tends to be green in a lot of games. So now this is finally starting to really look like an actual health bar. Definitely more along the lines of what we want. Okay, you can also change the images for this health bar. So if you click on background, you'll notice it has a source image. And if you click on fill, it also has a source image. So you can change those to be whatever you like. And you may have to fiddle around a bit with them, the anchors, to make your fill look correctly. Maybe your background has large borders around it. You might need to alter your fill anchors in order to make that look correct, right? That may take a little bit of finagling, and it's up to you to do that. If you prefer, you can just use the built-in graphic and it looks pretty good. Okay, so we're going to now, if you want to mess around with that further, pause the video, do that, and then come back to us. And once you're done, we will begin work on the scripts. So the first thing we need to do for the scripts is to create a script to display our health. And we're going to call it health display. So once you have your slider set up to your liking, right click your scripts and go to create C# script, and we're going to call it health display. Double click your new script to open it in Visual Studio. Am I opening? No, it's just taking a very long time. Okay. So in here, we now have a health display script, and we've got a start and update function. We're going to leave those this time. We're not going to delete the start and update function because we're going to be using them. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is add a new using statement at the top. And these using statements are essentially telling Unity that we want to use an extra bit of code that we're not allowed to use without the using statement. And in this case, that is the code for the slider, and that is part of the UI code for Unity. So in order to update the value on our slider based on the script, we need this UI library. So at the top here, after where it says using Unity Engine, we're going to add a new line, and we're going to write using Unity Engine .ui. And that will allow you to actually use the UI code. I'm going to make this a bit larger so you can see. Okay. Then we're going to add some variables. So let's add some variables here. First of all, we need a variable for our slider. So the type of variable will be slider. And the name of the variable will be whatever we like. Let's call it health bar. Okay. And that means that we will have a reference to our slider. So we'll be able to do things to that slider because we have essentially the slider's address. So we can go to the slider and do stuff. And that's what that dot means. Remember, that means go to that thing and do stuff. So we've got our health bar here, essentially an address to it so that we can change it in the scene. All right, so let's put a note here as to what this is. This is our... This will contain the slider component attached to this object. Slider equals, slider means the variable is in the form of a slider component. So that's what the word slider means. It means the type of variable that this is a slider variable. Okay, we also will need access to the player so that we can access their health, find out what their health is. So we also need essentially the address of the player health component. So we can say that, player health, and let's call it player. So this is a variable of the type player health, and it will let us access the player's health information. So this will be the player health component that we can ask for info about the player's health. And let's put that on a new line so we can see it. Okay, so how do we actually get those? Because right now they are empty. These are like empty address book entries with no information about where to find this slider in this player health object. So we're going to use the start function to initialize those variables. Any variables that aren't set up in Unity have to be initialized somehow to something. And initialize means to set them to an initial value, a starting value. So how do we set them up to a starting value? Well, for health bar, we're going to just use the health bar that is attached to this game object. So we're going to assume that our health display component that we are writing right now, this script, is attached to the same object that has the slider. So to get a component off of our game object is very easy. We simply use get component with our angle brackets. We say what kind of component we want. Well, the kind we want is slider. So we type in the word slider, we use our parentheses and a semicolon. Now, what we don't have here is we need to actually store this value, and we're going to store it inside our health bar variable. Okay, so we can say health bar equals get component slider. Okay, so that's part one. Now part two is our player. How do we find our player? So we're going to use a rather inefficient function to find the player, because the player is not going to be on the same game object as our slider. So we cannot use get component to find the player's address. We need to use a wider search. And we're going to use the find objects of type function. This is a built-in function to Unity, just like get component, but this function will search the entire scene for that component rather than just our game object. So that is find object of type, and then we're going to use a angle bracket, and we're going to say what type. So the type is player health, so that's what we should put in this slot, player health. Again, our parentheses and a semicolon, and just like before, we need to actually store this value somewhere, because if we just it's like someone gives you the address to someone's house and you just crumple up and throw it away. You're not going to remember it. You need to store that somewhere. You need to put it in your address book, put it in your phone, whatever, right? So then we need to put our player here at the beginning with an equal sign. So we're going to store our player health into that player variable. Let's add some comments here to remind ourselves what we're doing. So we are getting the slider, capital S, slider component off this game object, which is the one this script is attached to, and storing it in the health bar variable. That's what that first one is doing. And this bottom one is search the entire scene for the player health component and store it in the player variable. Okay? And that is an expensive and inefficient function, but it's okay to do it as long as you're not doing it every frame. So the start function that we're inside here, this only happens once at the beginning of the game, so it's okay to have an inefficient function inside there. All right, let's move on. So remember we talked about our plan, every frame we're going to update this health bar to match the player's current health. So that means we're going to use the update function. Anytime you're doing something every frame, you should think, I need the update function. Okay, so let's figure out what we need to do. First of all, we need to think about how our slider works. Our slider, our health bar, requires a decimal style number, a decimal point, okay? And because it needs to be a value between 0 and 1. 0 is empty, 1 is full. Everything in between 0 and 1 is partially full, and you can choose how full it is. So if you do 0.6, it'll be 60% full, a little bit more than half. If you do 0.2, it will be almost empty, and so forth, okay? So how do we calculate a point value? We simply need to take our current health and divide it by the maximum health of our player. That's how we would calculate that. So we need to do an intermediate step here. We need to put our current health and our maximum health for the player in the form of a float variable. Why do we need to do that? Well, this is where it gets a little technical. In programming, if something is an integer value and you do a division on it, it's never going to result in a fraction, in a point value. It's only going to be rounded to the nearest whole number. So if we took, 3 and divided by 5, the result would be 1, which is not what we want, right? If we took 2 and divided by 5, the result would be 0, which is not what we want. What we need to do is divide 2.0 by 5.0, and then we're actually going to get a decimal result. That is what we're looking for, okay? We'll end up with 0.4. That's what we want. So how do we change that 2 to a 2.0? Well, it's easy. We'd simply store it in a different type of variable. We'll store it in a float variable. Okay, so let's put an intermediate variable here for our current health and our maximum health. So we're going to call those float current health and float max health. All right, now how do we get what these actually are? How do we get the current health of the player? Well, we would say equals player dot current health. And for max health, we would say equals player dot starting health. Easy enough, except we have a red underline, a squiggly red underline. And that's because current health, if you mouse over it, will say player health dot current health is inaccessible due to its protection level. And that's because our current health is a private variable. It is, you think of it as protected information that you're not allowed to just know. You have to actually ask the player for its current health value in a different way. Okay, so we need to write a function in the player to give us that current health value. So we're going to need to put on pause our health display, and we need to go to our player health. And in the player health, we're going to add a new function at the bottom. Okay, so it's going to be a public function because the entire point is that we're able to access this from a different script. So we need it to be public. Now, instead of void, we're going to put the word int next. And why do we do that? Well, because void usually means there is no return type for this function. Well, what is a return type? A return type means that function is giving information back to the code that is running the function. So when we do the function kill above here, we're not being given any information back afterwards. We're just doing something. All right, it's more like saying a command to do rather than asking a question. But in this case, we're asking a question. We're saying, hey, player, what is your current health again? And it will give us back information. So we need to have the type of information we're going to receive as that next word, and that is integer. We want an integer value. Okay, and then we're going to give the name of the functions. Let's call it get health. And we've got our parentheses to indicate that it's a function, and our curly braces. Now, why is it angry about this? Well, it's because we haven't actually returned a value yet. So how do we actually give that information back? Get health is going to be giving information to the player. Okay, to do that, we need to use the word return. Okay, so return will give back a value as the return type. Okay, so what do we want to return? We're going to return the value current health, and then we have a semicolon at the end. So this function will go to the player, it will get the current health value, and it will give that back to whatever code called this function, whatever code ran this function. Okay, so let's put a note here. This function is a custom function, so you can call it whatever you like. It is a getter function, which specifically will explain, will give information, so which gives info to the calling code. The int is the type of info that will be given. And then we can say in here, return will give the following info back to the player. Okay, so that's what this return will do. It will give this info back to, not to the player, to the calling code, sorry. Okay, So we now have a get health function. Make sure you save that script so we can use it. So save your player health, go to health display, and now instead of current health, we're going to use player.getHealth and as a function. So use your parentheses there. So that will get the health information from the player. Okay, so let's put a note to ourselves as to why we're doing this. Create temporary float variables so we can use float division. So we're going to use float division. What does that mean? Exactly what I was talking about earlier. We want to use a proper decimal point style division so that when we divide 2 by 5, for example, we get 0.4 instead of 0, okay? That's why we need these floats. So then we can actually set our health slider value. So how do we access the health slider value? We use the word health bar, which is the name of our health slider. If you go up here to health bar, slider, health bar. We then use dot, which means go to that thing. So we've got our health bar, we're gonna go to it, and we're gonna change the value on it. And that is the number between 0 and 1, which represents how full our slider is. Okay, so the health bar dot value will be equal to current health divided by max health. And because these are floats, they will use the correct type of division. Okay, so how do we actually note this for ourselves? We'll say the slider value should be between 0 and 1, with 0 being empty and 1 being full. Put on a new line. All right, and we can say we divide the current health by the max health to get a number between 0 and 1. Okay, save that. We're almost done. So save that health display script and go back to Unity. We now need to attach our health display script to the slider, okay? So click on your slider and drag your health display onto it, or you can use the add component button to add the health display. Okay, there shouldn't be any text or anything you need to change on your health display. It should automatically get all the information it needs. So now if we press play, we notice our health display has gone up to full. And if I move downward and bump into this saw, then it goes down by partially. And then if I hit it again, it goes down to almost completely gone. And if I hit it again, it goes down to 0 and my player is destroyed. So this seems to be exactly what we want our player to do. Okay, so that is how you set up a health display slider, a health bar in Unity. So if things are not going as they should, check your error messages, check that your script is actually attached. If you need to, you can go into your player, and on the player, you can choose the, have them selected, go to the inspector. In the 3 lines in the top right corner of the inspector, you can go to debug mode, and you can see a bit more information there. You can see that you can now actually see the current health, even though it's a hidden variable, so you can see how it works in Unity. Now I'm going to go back to normal mode. All right. If you're really stuck, I have included in the bottom of this tutorial a link to a bit of text of the scripts that I've used. So I will have a link to the scripts I used on GitHub, and they will be in the text below this video. So if you're really stuck, take a look at those. I don't recommend copying them because the important thing here is that you're learning how to use this code. But if you're really stuck, you can use them as a reference. Okay, so this is the last tutorial in this series, but if you skipped part 3 or 4 and you want to learn how to use icons or text to display your health instead of a health bar, you can go back and look at those. In the future, I will have tutorials covering topics such as enemies and player attacks, but for now we've kept it quite simple, just focusing on the player health. So look forward to those in the future if you want more information about how to create a more robust game. I hope this was useful to you. If you do have any questions or concerns, feel free to ask them in the comments below. If you found the video useful, go ahead and give it a like and consider subscribing to our channel for more tutorials about game development as well as updates on our game. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.